Hi everyone, I'm Ian, but you probably know me as Takale. I'm one of the system data entry coordinators, and this is the first of two videos that's going to go in depth about rule elements. In this, I'm going to give some general advice about writing rule elements, cover some misunderstandings about them, and do a deeper dive into some of the more commonly used ones. This isn't intended as a replacement for the wiki page on our project GitHub, which more exhaustively covers every rule element and provides a lot more examples. Hopefully, though, it helps to clear up some of the common snags people find when they start using rule elements. So, let's start at the top. A rule element is the basic way that the Pathfinder 2e system implements automation. They are JavaScript object notation, so JSON, objects that are added to any item, and they become active when the item is on an actor. Rule elements can alter and access actor data, add modifiers or notes to roles, handle complex resistances, and much more. Not all rule elements need to be written out directly in JSON. The system has forms to fill out for some of them, and we're adding more as we can. So let's take a look at some of these, and this one we're going to look at first is probably the most commonly used one, and it has a nice form for us to fill out. So this is the flat modifier rule element. And so we can see here that the form has several parts to it. You have a label, and that can be set as something different than the name of the item. We have a selector. This tells it what type of check to apply to, or what type of statistic to apply the bonus to. We have the value. This is what we're actually going to modify. And then we have the modifier type. This is for stacking rules in Pathfinder. So here we can see we have one flat modifier that we'll be adding to all skills, and one flat modifier that we'll be adding specifically to diplomacy, because this has a +1 status bonus and a +2 circumstance bonus. These two should stack, and so diplomacy in total would get a +3 from this single item. By default, this label is the name of the item itself. And so if we modify that name, we get a different label on this, but we can always enter in a manual label for it if we would like. So, right, so here we could say all skills and something diplomacy. And so now our item, when we roll on this character, we can see what these are coming from. We can also edit the full rule element here by clicking on this edit button, and we can see that we have a lot of information here, including one thing that wasn't in the form. And we will get into slugs in a little bit, but just keep in mind that there are some things that these forms don't always cover. All right. I want to take a look at one more rule element to show off something else that they can do. And so to do that, we're going to look at Valoros, the iconic fighter. And we're going to go here to the Feats tab, and we have the Bravery feature that I want to take a look at. As we can see, Bravery, when you roll a success at a will save against a fear effect, you get a critical success instead. So this is the part that we are interested in, because this is something we can automate using rule elements. And so if we come to the Rules tab, we can see here the Adjust Degree of Success on the actor. And so if we hit this Edit button, we can get a nicer view to actually see what's going on here. And so let's break down these parts of the rule element one by one. So there is Adjust Degree of Success. That's the key of the rule element. That key is telling the system what kind of rule element you're using. If it's a flat modifier, that would read flat modifier. If it's a damage dice, it would read damage dice. Adjust strike would read adjust strike, and so on and so on. Then we have our selector. This tells the system what we're going to actually be modifying. What kind of roll is this Adjust Degree of Success going to modify? Then our adjustment is on a success, we should do 1 degree better. So on a success, adjust it up by 1 to a critical success. And then we have this thing here, the predicate. The predicate is something that a lot of people struggle with when they first start writing rule elements. And what they are is a way to restrict the applicability of a rule down to just a specific circumstance. And so if we look at this, right, when you roll a success set of will save against a fear effect, and so what we're doing here is we are saying if the roll has the fear trait, if you are making a roll against an effect that has the fear trait, then that will be included in the roll and then kick this rule element on. Predicates can include more than just traits for for what you can actually predicate on. It's anything called a roll option can be predicated on, and I'll show off how to find those, how they're structured a little bit later in the video. So before we go into roll options or selectors in more depth, I want to talk about case in rule elements. So something that you might have noticed is that the selectors were always all lowercase, right? So we had a selector of will on that adjust degree of success. We had a selector of skill -check on the first flat modifier. And you might have also seen that in the adjust degree of success, the adjustment, we had 1 degree better. These are in what we refer to as Kebab case. This means that the text is all lowercase. There's never any capital letters. There's also never any punctuation other than the dash, and spaces are replaced by dashes. Kebab case is used for all roll options and all selectors. So if you're having a problem with a flat modifier that's not applying, double check that you haven't capitalized, diplomacy. The system doesn't know what skill that is. Computers are very, very strict about capitalization of words. It sees these two things as very different statements. So there's another case that we'll need to know about, and this is what the actual keys of the rule elements are. So that is what's called camel case. And so in a damage dice rule element, there's a property called dice number. And so instead of having a dash between the words, we just capitalize the first letter of the second word. So this is in camel case, and then its argument is just going to be a number. But if you had some other property of a rule element that was like that, the key for it would be in camel case, and the actual value would always be in Kebab case. So hopefully that makes sense. This editor that I'm using, by the way, is something called Sublime Text. It's what I use for bulk text manipulation. Would recommend it if you're going to be doing a lot of rule element work. Not necessary if you're just automating a few things. The system editor in Foundry is actually quite robust. And so, this editor lets us do quite a bit without having to rely on an external editor. All right, now that we've talked about the cases that we need to know about, Kebab case and camel case, let's talk about how we can actually find those selectors and roll options that we can use within rule elements. So to do that, we're going to actually put some actors on the map here. So we're going to drop Valeros here, and we're going to drop in a dragon. And so what I want to do is I am going to have Valeros make an attack against the dragon. Okay, so he's going to make his unarmed strike. He hits the dragon. And so now I'm going to right-click this roll and choose Inspect Roll. And here we see a lot of information about the actual role itself. So up here are all of the selectors that we can choose from. So we have all. All is usually a very bad selector to use because you're going to hit a lot more than what you probably want. We have unarmed attack roll, we have strike attack roll, legendary attack because this Valeros is legendary in unarmed attacks. He's got legendary in brawling weapons. So the basic unarmed attack rolls, this would only hit that basic unarmed attack. It wouldn't hit, say, a monk's fist strike. It wouldn't hit crane strike, crane stance strikes, anything like that. It would only affect this one specific thing. Brawling group, strength attack, strength based. So we can see there's lots and lots of things that we can pick from here. And then inside this, we have the role options. So if you remember before, we had the role option of fear inside that rule element for adjust degree of success. Here we have all of the base traits of the attack: agile, attack, finesse, melee, non-lethal, target. The strike was actually targeted, unarmed, and then we have some other things. And so this is the top level of the role option, so what we can call the domain. And so we have an action, and then a colon, and this is our subdomain, strike. So this was a strike action. So if you wanted a flat modifier that applied to all strikes, you could either strike attack roll as the selector, or use a predicate to narrow it down to action strike. You want to use selectors to narrow as much as possible, because otherwise, when people make rolls, if they're bringing up this roll dialog, they will see the disabled penalty in here, even if you don't want it to apply. So if I had given a flat modifier to all, and then used a predicate to narrow it down to strike attack, to action strike, then it would automatically work properly when making strikes, but for skills it would show up there as a disabled thing, and so that's just messier. So it's better to use the selector to do your first sort of narrowing down as much as possible. So we can come back into the inspector. Let's zoom out here so we can really take a look at some of these. So in here we see statements about Valeros and what Valeros is wearing as armor. So Valeros has breastplate equipped. The armor is common. It's in the plate group. The armor is level 0. So this tells us all about the armor that he wears. We also have these attack. So this is telling us the attack categories, right? So there's just not enough ways to describe strikes and attack proficiencies without overlapping, so we went with something generic here. And so this is saying that Valeros is, with advanced weapons, he's at rank 2. 2 is expert, right? And so this is just the basic 4 sets of proficiencies. In here we can see Valeros's attribute modifiers, we can see his class, we can see the defense, right? So what is his rank with each different type of armor. And then we can see the feats that Valeros has. And so all of these things that are in this role option list are things that you can predicate on. Right? So here we have hands free, but really, because there is a Magus option that requires you to not just have a hand free, but also not have any free hand items. Free hand items count against you for that. So we have to split out that he might have 2 hands free, but he's actually got a shield in one of those hands, so one of them isn't quite so free. And so we have also these these role options that are about the item itself. And so you'll see a lot of things that that duplicate, right? So we have item trait agile, but we also had agile all the way up here. It's generally better to use the more specific term. So if you wanted a bonus to apply to all agile attacks that you make, item trait agile is going to be better to predicate on because it's more specific. It's a lot less vague because now we know I want the item to have the agile trait. And that normally won't cause any problems, but in some weird situations, maybe you could end up with a trait that isn't coming from the item itself. Right, so you can see all of this information about it, right? The damage dice, there's one damage dice. It does physical damage. It's a D4, right? There's 4 faces on our dice. The damage type is bludgeoning, and so you could do all of this stuff. You can use all this stuff to actually predicate on. And so there is one thing I want to show off here with specifically this, where we look at the number of faces that the damage die has. And so that is the Deadly Simplicity feat. Right, so this is using something called an item alteration rule element. And so we can see here that the Deadly Simplicity is now, it's looking for things that have D4 damage die. Right, so this is saying that this is a very complicated predicate, so we can kind of gloss over this until we talk about predicates more. But we can see that this is, this is telling us that it wants unarmed strikes that have a D4 damage die. So this wouldn't make any difference to an unarmed strike that already had a D6 or a D8 or a D10. Okay, so a few more things to call out in here. So this whole section here, self, is a very special section of the role options. So in self, we have self creature. So this is telling us that Valeros is a creature, not a hazard. Or self-type character, sorry. Yeah, so, right, so this is telling us that he's a player character, not an NPC. Self-trait, so we can see that Valeros has the human and humanoid traits. Right, so all of this information, the signature is the unique identifier for that Valeros. Right, he has a shield equipped, all of this information. And if we scroll down, we can see target. So this is telling us that the target is a caster, right? It's a dragon, it has spells, it has arcane spells. We can see all of the traits of the dragon, and these are things that we could also predicate on. So we could predicate a bonus to damage rolls on or against dragons. We could predicate a bonus to athletics if the target is huge or just bigger than us. Right, so we have target size huge, also target size 4. This is a numeric expression of huge. And so we can get all of this information. The important thing to know is that the dragon, this role inspector is from Valeros's point of view. And so self refers to Valeros, target refers to the dragon. The dragon, when it prepares its data during the strike, gets its own set of role options, and these target and self role options are swapped. Instead of the dragon's data being target, the dragon's data is self. It's under this self domain. And Valeros's data isn't under target because the dragon's not targeting Valeros. Valeros's data is under origin. And so I want to say that this dragon, we're going to give him a new passive, and this is bonus versus human. And so this dragon's really, really good at fighting humans. He has a +10 untyped bonus to his AC if the target, or if the origin of the effect has the human trait. So now Valeros is going to swing again, and look at that. So now, before, our dragon's AC was 37. Now our dragon's AC is 47. But if I call out my Goblin Warrior, level -1, he's never going to hit that dragon. But the dragon doesn't get that AC bonus against the Goblin Warrior. So that's how the role inspector works. That's the very basics of getting selectors and role options and how we can use them. And so now I want to talk about how to actually build a predicate in a more complex way. I'm going to talk a little bit more about predicates and how to build more complex ones. So we're going to build this here in the external editor because it's a little bit easier to sort of see. I can zoom in on my text. So I'm going to start by just writing out my rule element in full. Right, so let's say this is a bonus to all athletics rolls, and we want the, right, it's going to be a +1 circumstance modifier. And then we want to predicate this. So predicates are an array, and arrays have a set of square braces around them, and then each item in the array tells us what will be necessary for this rule to be on. So I'm going to say that this is for a feat that we're going to call Dragon Wrestler, and it gives you a bonus to athletics checks when you are trying to grapple a dragon that is bigger than you. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is I want to say, well, this is only supposed to apply to grapple actions, and it's only supposed to apply if I am targeting a dragon. So now, how do I manage to express if the target is bigger than me? To do that, we're going to need to use a logical test. And so logical tests in role options are going to be given as an object. Objects are wrapped in curly braces. And you can note that the entire rule element itself is wrapped in curly braces because it's in JavaScript object notation, right? Rule elements are JavaScript objects. And so we're going to make a new object, and we are going to use the less than logical test. And so the less than logical test, like all of the comparison logical tests, takes an array with exactly 2 items. So the first one we're going to do is self size and target size. And so what this is going to say is this statement is true if your size is less than the target size. If I wanted to include dragons that were my size, then I would have less than or equal to as the logical test. So now let's copy our rule element, jump back over to Foundry, and we are going to come over here. We're going to make a new item. Dragon Wrestler, spelling it right. And even though I made this as an active effect like rule element, when I paste in the rule that I wrote, it's going to have this all right here. It's automatically going to put it into the form for us, and we can see here is kind of a pain to read, right? We can always just edit like this, and we get something a lot like the editor that we just had. So now, right, I'm going to drop my Dragon Wrestler feat here into Valeros's bonus feats. Valeros doesn't have the grapple action. Let's fix that, shall we? And so now, when Valeros targets the dragon and attempts to wrestle, we get Dragon Wrestler +1. If he tries to wrestle the goblin, we don't have that bonus. If we make the dragon tiny, shrink that dude down, you know, somebody hits it with a baleful polymorph or whatever we're calling it now, make that roll, it no longer kicks on because the dragon is now smaller than us. So these predicates can be made to be very complicated, right? Let's take a look at one that is more complex, the one that I showed a little bit ago, which was Deadly Simplicity. And because I always get these questions on videos, that module that I'm using to do the quick searching is called Quick Insert. So here, right, so I've got a hotkey to reformat my JSON. I still don't like how it reformats some things, so I'm going to reformat it a little bit further, just by hand, so we can see what all is going on here. Okay, so this is our rule element for Deadly Simplicity, right? So here we can see that, remember that each of these statements must be true. And so we can collapse them here in the editor so we can see there's really only two statements at the top level. The first is that the item has to be your deity's favorite item, right? If we look at Deadly Simplicity's text, when you're wielding a deity's favorite weapon, increase the damage die of that weapon by 1 step. If your deity's favorite weapon is an unarmed attack, and the damage die is smaller than d6, increase its damage die size to d6. Okay, so here, right, we have the item must be a deity favored weapon. And then we have an or. So or, right, or is saying that if any of the arguments inside the or array is true, then the entire or statement, everything in here, returns true. So the or statement is saying that either the item is a simple weapon, or it's an unarmed strike that has D4. And the reason we can get away with saying D4 instead of, you know, saying less than D6 is because in Pathfinder 2e, there is no D3 or D2 damage die. It's just D4, D6, 8, 10, 12. Those are your damage dies that you can use, ignoring the, like, 3 NPCs that list D3 damage. So this this predicate is a compound predicate, right? It has multiple parts to it. And so this part in here, right, and much like the OR test, it has an array, right? OR is saying that if any of these arguments is true, then this whole object returns true. And is saying only if that entire array is true does and return true. So this or will return true if either it's a simple weapon or if it is both unarmed and has D4 damage. So hopefully that makes sense. There's a lot of other ways that we can actually build out these predicates, right? So instead of or, we also have the NOR test, and this is not or. So that is just a, if that or would return true, then NOR would return false. It just negates the truth value of that. We also have NAND, right? So this would be not and. So one of these could be true, but not both, right? We have something called XOR, So this wouldn't do anything for this particular one because these are guaranteed to be exclusive from each other because you can't be in both the simple and unarmed category at the same time. But XOR is exclusive OR. So this would only return true if one and only one of its arguments returns true. Right? We already saw less than and talked about less than or greater than, but we have, less than or equal, greater than, and greater than or equal. These are all logical tests we can do inside a predicate, and these let us do quite a bit of logic inside these predicates and do a lot more advanced things than you might think. One last addendum I want to add to all of these tests is that before I was comparing two different roll options to each other, but let's say I had something that I wanted to kick on when the actor was above level 10. So right, self level, and then I would just do 10. All right, so this is saying greater than or equal to the actor who the rule element is on when they are above level 10. This rule would be active. But yeah, so you can enter in just straight numbers. You can't have more than 2 arguments in any of these numerical comparison tests. And you can't do math inside them. So you can't do, say, self level over 2. That won't work. Right, it has to be one of the items that ends up in the role inspector. If we come over here, come to the role inspector, and we look for any of these things that ends with a numerical argument. Right, so you could do your unarmed attack rank, you could do your constitution modifier, you could do any of them that end up with a numerical value, right? So if I wanted to say that this kicks on when rule kicks on when I am below 50% health, you can do that because we have HP percent in the roll options. But I can't do, if I wanted to know whether me and my target had the same feat, because the system can't do numerical comparisons between strings. All right, before we get started on going more in depth into specific rule elements, there's one more thing I want to talk about, and that is actor data and how we find it or item data. And that is not quite as obvious, not as easily surfaced as, say, the role options or the selectors are. But what we will do is we will use F12 to open up our console, make sure that we're actually on the console tab and have a token selected. Then we just type _token.actor. And that will then send out that actor data to the console. And so we can see, right, there's a lot of stuff in here. Almost all of the things that we're actually going to want to look at on an actor are going to be under the system level. Most of this other stuff is stuff that is either pulled from system or it's part of items. So let's say we want to know, what our class DCs are, right? We want to reference the class DC, or we want to change the rank of our class DC, right? We can go under system, we can go to proficiencies, we can go to class DC. We see that Valeros has the fighter class DC, and so we can see all of that data right here, right? It's rank 2, so he's expert. It has a value of 31 for the DC. If we were going to make a roll with it, a class roll for some reason, that would have a value of 21, right? And so we have all this information, right? We can see even the modifiers, that's in an array, so we can't access it easily. But anything that isn't inside an array, we can access really easily with rule elements. So if you highlight them, you'll see that this says, system.proficiencies.classDCs.fighter.dc. That is the full path if you needed to reference that value. Right, so if we wanted to know what our rank for perception is or modify it, we would be looking at system.perception.rank. Right, and so you can, if you need to reference an actual value on the actor, this is how you would do it. Is you would use console to log the whole actor object, and then from there we can actually look at the whole actor data and get all the information we want and make references to it. You can see there's shortcuts to class DC and class DCs, but like I said, usually safest to just reference it where it lived originally down in system. All right, now that we have some idea about how to get actor data references, we can combine that with what we already know to actually use actor data inside a rule element. So let's start here. So let's say we have a feat and we want to have it give a bonus to religion equal to the actor level, right? And so this is a proficiency bonus. So let's say this is a feat that gives us a proficiency bonus equal to our level in some skill we're not trained in. So if we drop this onto Valeros, we see that he now has a plus 13 to his religion skill despite being untrained. And if we come down to the actual feat, here, we can edit it live in place. So if we did say all skills, this is equivalent to untrained improvisation, where you get your actor level to your untrained skills, right? So any skill that's trained already has a proficiency bonus, and that proficiency modifier is higher than the one provided by this, so the system's going to use the higher bonus you already have. And so if we look at untrained improvisation, we can see that its rule is significantly more complicated, right? So here we have that this is, we have the same selector that applies to all skill checks, but now we have this weird thing. Instead of being a primitive value, which is just a single thing, if you click on that, you can change that to brackets, and by default, brackets go by the actor level. In these brackets, right, we can say that between level, 0, doesn't matter, and 4, we use actor level -2 as the proficiency bonus. Between level 5 and 6, we use actor level -1, and at level 7 above, we use actor level, right? And so that is what the implementation of this feat is doing, right? Where we have this sort of scaling up of our proficiency bonus to account for the fact that we're, good at skills we're even untrained with, right? This got filled in by the system for us. But in the values themselves, we can see that it actually is referenced as an at reference. And an at reference is something that will resolve as a number. So here in brackets, we're doing this sort of weird thing where we tell it it's the actor, and then we have a vertical pipe, and then we tell it level, right? So that is equivalent to saying actor.level, but part of brackets is a little bit more legacy code. So we can remake this exact setup without using brackets, using something called a ternary, which I don't think we need to get into in this video. Maybe in the next video we'll dive into ternaries and sort of how they work, because they are a little bit more advanced, but they let us do brackets in a way that doesn't end up looking like this in the full JSON, which is really gross looking. That's just hard to follow when you first look at it. So, all right, so that's how we can use actor data, or one of the ways we can use actor data. There are other ways we can use actor data or item data. So let's say I take the assurance feat. I drag it onto Valeros here, and he's going to take assurance in acrobatics. So now, when I look at the copy of assurance on him, I see a lot of stuff, including some new rule elements, right? So these are 3 rule elements we haven't looked at yet. But the part that I want to actually highlight is this here. So this is something called the just modifier rule element, and this is implementing the part of assurance that you don't get to apply any other bonuses or modifiers, penalties. It all goes away except for your proficiency modifier. Here, right, we have the selector. So this is telling us what skill it's going to apply to. And now we have, instead of an at reference, we have a reference that is surrounded by these square brackets, by the curly braces. And so it's these braces, then item, and then that pipe again. And so this is the type of reference when you see something that looks like, item, pipe, something, or actor, pipe, something. Those are references that will return a string instead of a number. And so this is important because here we want the string. We want the string acrobatics to be our selector. And so anytime you have item data, right, so this gets stored in an item's flag when we make the choice when we first add the feat. The flags has a bunch of different subsections, and so we're under the PF2E subsection, and then rule selections. This is where we store selections that we made, and then assurance is the actual flag name, right? And so this is telling us, we are going to have a selector. This gets read by the system. It says, hey, look in here to find what you selected in this, and this is what's called a choice set, right? So this choice set has all of the different skills in it as a choice. And we'll go into choice sets a little bit more later. But we can see that the flag we're calling assurance. That's how we know it's rule selections dot assurance. And then what gets stored there? It's the thing we selected. In this case, acrobatics. So that's how we can actually reference item data or actor data that isn't a numerical thing. We can use that. We can use these different types of references to select actual text off of the actor. Okay, so now let's move on to some more examples of rule elements and really kind of dive into what they're actually made of and show off some more stuff the system can do. So one of the most common questions we get with rule elements or with the system is, how can I make my character change their image when I use untamed form, or I use dragon form, something like that. I cast a polymorph spell. I want my actor image to change, or I have the change shape feature. How can I change the image? And the answer is through the token image rule element. There's a few ways to do this, right? So if I go to the rules tab on this, I've already set up a token image rule element. Token image is really nice because it has a form that gives us all of the data for the token image rule element that we could use, that we can actually access in the rule element. So we don't need to worry about editing the full rule element. You can edit it here and see that it's pretty simple as far as rule elements go. We don't need any of this stuff if you're just writing something that's going to change its image. But the value here is the image that we're going to swap out to. So when we add this rule element to Valeros, it changes Valoros's token and if we edit the version, the copy that's on him, we can actually see what each of these little knobs do. Right, so here's the token scale. Because these images, especially the ones from the token pack, because they have a lot of what's called pop-out, where they break out of the frame, that ends up needing the token scale to be set. Usually 1.5 is the right scale to use, but depending on if you are using images, some of them might be as high as 3, for the ones with the most extreme pop-out. We can also, change the opacity. Right, so if we drop it down, now it's a semi-transparent Valoros. Other people would still see this token. It's not like turning the token invisible as the GM. Right, the effect might look, somewhat similar, but this isn't actually hidden. Other people would see this. We can also apply a tint color. Right, and so if you are going to be, say, doing underwater combat, you could apply a blue tint color and a little bit of opacity, or a little bit of alpha to it. And so now it looks like it's underwater, right? And so you can do this kind of thing instead of an image path referencing this. You can do a relative image path, find the actor data for where the token is at. And so you can just tell it, use the same token you're already using, but apply this tint and this opacity or rescale it. You can do lots of things with this token image rule element, and because it has this form, it's really nice that you don't have to come in here and play around with hex colors or setting alphas manually, anything like that. And we also have this nice image picker to grab from, so you don't have to type everything in by hand. And then removing token images is easy as just selecting the token, deleting the effect. One more thing to talk about with token image is that we can predicate these image changes. So here, let's say I want to predicate this on having an effect. So since I have the effect right here, I'm going to predicate it on having the guidance effect on the actor. So now, when I add my effect to Valoros, nothing changes. When I drag on the guidance spell effect, the token image applies. And so we don't have to, just rely on having these extra effects to handle your untamed form. You can put those on a new item on the actor that isn't an effect and stays there permanently. So it's not something you're going to accidentally click away, and have that change automatically happen when you apply, canine form. It'll automatically swap you out to a wolf token. So there's a lot of stuff you can do there. The wiki has an example about how to do that, specifically with animal form canine. So let's get into some of the weeds with flat modifier that might not be immediately obvious. So the first thing is, right, if I drag this onto Valoros, like looking at this, we have, +1 status bonus to all skill checks and a +2 circumstance bonus to diplomacy specifically. So when I add this feat, let's go clear out all of our feats here. So we're no longer dealing with our goofy bonus to untrained stuff. So, so we should have a net +3. So when I add this diplomacy should turn to 18. Let's see what happens. 17. Well, that's weird. And if I check the actual roll breakdown, what I get here is that we're only getting the +2 bonus to diplomacy. We're not getting the +1 to all skill checks. But this is status and this is circumstance, so this should stack, right? Well, let's look at Valoros's copy of the feat. And let's see what's going wrong. So both of these have a label of flat. And what happens if I just relabel that to all skills? Hey, look at that. That changes it so that it's now adding. So why does the label matter? Well, it's not so much the label that matters, it's the slug, or the lack of one. So slugs are a slugified or kebab case version of the name of the feat or the item that the rule is on by default. But we can tell a flat modifier, hey, you have a different slug than what the system is going to generate for you. And the reason this is important is because if two modifiers have the same slug, the system assumes that they are, in fact, the same thing and should not stack. So the system's going to throw the second one that shows up out. And so in this case, it was throwing out the generic one for all skill checks because it had processed the this modifier first. Right, and so it's a good idea if you have multiple flat modifiers on the same item that apply to the same statistic or could apply to the same statistic, you should define slugs for each of them. Right, so now those two will never, even though they have the same label, they're never going to conflict with each other, and both of them properly show up in the role modifiers. So that's the first thing that we have to kind of be aware of when we deal with flat modifiers, is that you can have these slug collisions. Some other things we can do with flat modifier, you can add a modifier to HP, and that adds to your maximum HP. Right, so if I wanted a if I wanted a rule that added my strength modifier to HP, you know, now we're 4 HP coming from this. If I wanted to do that multiplied by my level, so let's say I wanted to, you know, double dip, you know, get strength and con to my hit points, I can do some math. Actor.level times actor.abilities.strength.mod. And so now we see that, you know, Valeros is quite a bit heftier, right? So he's got access to a lot more hit points because we've, you know, added this huge bonus onto it. Right, so you can modify your HP, you can modify your armor class, you can modify perception, or you can just do a bonus to initiative, right? So this doesn't give you a bonus to perception, it gives you a bonus to your initiative no matter what you have set. Right, so no matter what skill you set for your initiative, you can do flat modifiers to saves, anything like that. You can even do a flat modifier to your land speed. You know, so now, you know, a bonus equal to your level for your land speed. If you wanted to round that down, you can do some mathematical terms. So this is floor, so that is the mathematical term for rounding down. And so we are going to say your actor level divided by 5 is your modifier. Right, so floor at actor.level divided by 5. And so we can see now that that should be, you know, 13 divided by 5 is 2 and a little bit of remainder, right? 2.6. So we're not getting a 0.6 here. It doesn't do fractional things, but we're still getting this 27. But what we really want is 5 times that, right? I want a 5-foot bonus at level 5, a 10-foot bonus at level 10, 15-foot bonus at level 15. And so this would accomplish that, right? We're going to round it down. So we figure out how many whole values of, how many whole multiples of 5 we have, and then multiply that by 5. So Yeah, lots of things you can do with this, right? So instead of floor, we could do ceiling, which would round up. There's the just round function, but it's much, much better to always specify either round down or round up. Normally rounding down is what you want. Yeah, so we have a lot of different things we can actually modify with flat modifier. We can also add to our speed, so strike damage. Right, and so if we come in here, so we're going to add our actor level to damage, and so we can see, now we have this huge modifier to our damage from this rule element, right? You just make it a flat value, and then we also have damage type, and we also can set the damage category. Note that, right, persistent, precision, and splash are all different damage categories. They aren't individual types of damage, but we can add in here, fire, and we can add fire damage to these strikes if we want to. And so, yeah, so we're adding a +5 fire damage. The reason, by the way, when this was on status, it didn't add any fire damage is because when the system is trying to interpret a status bonus to your fire damage on your strike, which the strike doesn't have any by default. But if I had, say, an alchemist fire, an alchemical bomb that did fire damage, then it would look and say, oh, I'm going to add a status bonus to that fire damage. But if I just do it untyped, like most additional damage type is, you'll get the actual damage out of it, right? So note that when you enter in your damage type here, you can use homebrew damage types, but you have to use all lowercase, right? So, you can add any damage type you want, but if you, forget and you type in a non-existent damage type, and remember the system thinks void and void are very different things, right? So be sure you, keep an eye on your case sensitivity in all of these fields. One other feature of flat modifiers is that you can hide if disabled. So let's say I have, I'm going to add 5 void damage, target trait, goblin. Right, so this isn't going to be on every strike, and I want it to be hidden if disabled. And that's important for our roll dialog. So I'm going to target my dragon. I'm going to bring up my roll dialog, and I don't see the void damage even as an option. Whereas when I do that against the goblin, it's right there. Right, the system will automatically kick that on for us because of our predicate, but because we told it, hey, if this is disabled, don't show it in that dialog, that's great for things that should add to your DC. So if I had a modifier that added to my perception DC against, say, attempts to steal from me or attempts to avoid notice, then you can do that and have it only add to the DC and have it hidden inside the dialogue if it applies in certain circumstances. In this case, in that case with DC, we can actually just do perception DC, and notice that the damage goes away because we no longer have a selector that handles damage, and we can do right. So Valoros is now very good if a goblin tries to feint or sneak past him. He's very hard to do that against. But if I wanted that to be either against from an action from a goblin or an action on a goblin, I would do that for just perception instead of DC. But I could still hide it if I wanted to or not. And yeah, the damage type is still actually in there because the editor won't delete things just because you changed something. The last thing I want to say about flat modifiers is they do have this selector. We can change it from a single selector to multiple selectors. And so that would let us add things all at once. So let's say I have a bonus that I want to add to both will and then also to fortitude. All right, so this is all saves except for reflex saves. Right, and so you can see here that we have that. If I delete the one from fortitude, that drops down. I can add reflex in here. If I wanted it to be all saving throws, then I just do the saving throw selector, and now all 3 of my saving throws have that bonus on there. So that is, a nice way to have a more compact set of rules is by just using multiple selectors if the bonus should apply to multiple types of roll that don't otherwise have a larger single selector to grab all of them. From flat modifier, right, we might have a situation like we saw before where we wanted to have different bonuses from the same thing to different statistics. Right, we might have, say, a flat modifier that applies to all skill checks, and then we want to make, hey, this is instead of just a +1 to intimidation, we instead want it to be a +2. So the way we can do that more compactly, instead of using a second flat modifier with a whole different slug, we can use adjust modifier. So this gives us a single modifier that we then just change. Right, so if we look at our flat modifier, I've given it this general skill check modifier, a slug of my modifier slug, and then we have this. This is the adjust modifier rule element. So this is saying that for intimidation rolls, we're going to upgrade my modifier slug to 2. And so if I add this feat onto Valoros, we can see that adjust modifier, the name of this item, right, is +1 for medicine, but +2 for intimidation, right? So that's how adjust modifier works. We can do a lot more with it, though. It's not just adding, right? So let's say we have this as 2 already, right? Well, intimidation is still at 2, right? But so is everything else. And that's because we have this mode upgrade. So upgrade is saying, if I have a 5 here, intimidation goes up to 5 because it's saying, well, if the modifier to intimidation is below a 2, then increase it to 2, right? That's what upgrade does. We could instead use the add mode, and so that adds 2 to whatever the modifier is. We can use the multiply mode, and we can multiply that modifier by 2. And so, right, so we have different ways that we can actually do this. If you look at the rage effect, for example, right, the rage effect is quite complicated. Oops, not on the rage effect, sorry. Let's look at Dragon Instinct. An item that may or may not be long for this world, right, with Player Core 2 coming out here in just a few months. And you can see Barbarian, for those who have not looked at the rule elements on this before, Barbarian is easily, at this point, the second most complex class in terms of its rule elements. You don't see it coming, but it is what it is. So here in the Dragon Instinct, right, we have all of these different adjust modifiers, and we can see what some of them are doing, right? So here we have an adjust modifier that says, hey, when you're doing when you're making a strike, we want to upgrade the modifier of the rage damage bonus to 4. And the damage type can also be adjusted in here. So the damage type of that modifier is now changed to the damage type from the choice that you make for dragon. So, right, so we can use these adjust modifiers to actually change things around, right? So this is kicking on the increased rage damage once you're above level 7 and have the specialization feature. We can also, if we look at the rage class feature, or the rage action, sorry, this class is kind of a mess. I look forward to cleaning it up for Player Core 2. Right, if we look at the adjust modifier on the rage action, we see that for an agile strike, we want to multiply the rage bonus by half, right? We want to cut the rage bonus from whatever it is, 4, 8, whatever, and drop that by half, because that's the rules for raging with an agile weapon, is that you only deal half of your actual rage damage. And then this priority, so this is something that we haven't talked about on this, but every rule element has a different priority, and it's not normally something you need to worry about. With adjust modifier, if we remove this, we can see that the multiply mode has a default priority of 10. It happens before the add mode. Priorities happen in order from lowest number to highest number. So a lower priority thing will happen first, and then higher priority things will happen after them. So by default, multiply mode is going to happen before any other, before things get added, and override has a priority of 50. But what we want to do is we want this multiply to happen after the fact, right? So we're just going to manually change that up to 95. That's after all of the other modifiers are applied. That's, everything else is already calculated. And then we say, all right, when you're done calculating, then do, multiply it by half. If I wanted to create a feat that adds 2 that doesn't get cut in half, all I would need to do is just add another adjust modifier, mode add, and then make the priority above 95. Right? There's no actual upper limit for this this value, but most of them are set at 60 or below by default. And that priority really only matters for adjust modifier and another rule element called active effect like. Here, right, we have the animal skin feat. This is a barbarian feat that gives you an item bonus to your AC while you're raging without wearing actual armor. And so one of the sort of difficulties with this feat is that bonus is cumulative with your potency runes, and this makes it kind of a pain, because stacking different item bonuses is kind of not in the rules until it is, right? Until this feat comes along and, throws a wrench in there. So instead, we have these adjust modifiers that are going to modify the values from bracers of armor, explorer's clothing, and mage armor. We should update this to the new name of mage armor. And so, right, if we look into this here, so, right, we're adding. It's only going to happen when we're raging. And then we have this new field called relabel. So this is something that adjust modifier has that other rule elements don't. Relabel tells it to relabel the modifier. So here, right, when you see a string that looks like this, that's pf2e dot something something something, right, this capital pf2e, that is what's called a localization string. You don't need to use those if you're not working on the system itself, or you're not working on a module that is going to get localized to another language. These are there so that it's easier for our translators to just, change our English language file, just change out what the text says in there, rename it to, fr.json instead of en.json, and then they'll have, a French language file. You can just use, text in this. So this is bracers, armor, parentheses, animal skin. And so that now tells you in the actual label here, when you look at your armor class, you would see this telling you, oh, this is from my braces of armor with the bonus from animal skin, right? And then the last thing in there is, we were using this bonus because the actual value changes depending on whether you have a certain feature or not, and so it's more compact for us to write it to the actor data and then read it from there later. Now I want to talk about one of the most flexible and also hardest to use rule elements in the system, and that is the active effect-like rule element. The active effect-like rule element lets us write data to the actor directly. So most rule elements they apply their modifier during data preparation, and all the rule data just lives on the item itself, right? Whether it's a choice set or anything else like that, it's just referencing data from all of the data for it is on the actual item. Active effect likes will end up modifying base actor data in a way that is different than just applying a modifier. So in this example, we have the barbarian dedication, right? So barbarian dedication the barbarian archetype has a feat called barbarian resiliency. Barbarian resiliency requires us to know the number of feats you have taken from the barbarian dedication. Well, the system doesn't know whether a feat is from the barbarian dedication or not, so in order to track that, we use an active effect like to actually just count. So here we have active effect like mode, just like with adjust modifier. It has all the same modes: add, override, multiply, upgrade, downgrade. And we're going to write to a path on the actor itself, right? So this is going to add to flags.pf2e.barbarian.archetype feat count. The system doesn't have any of this in it by default, right? By writing to flags.pf2e.barbarian already, this isn't something that exists on Valeros here, right? Valeros has no reason to have barbarian flags, so this active effect like will actually create this structure on the actor. And then we're going to add 1 to that. We're going to set the value of this to 1, or if it exists, we're going to add 1 to it. All right, so we can take Valeros, we add barbarian dedication to him, right? Doesn't matter what we pick. And then we can actually come in to the actor data for Valeros, and we can find the flags, go into PF2E, and now we see that we have archetype feat count 1. Well, now on Valeros, when I add the barbarian resiliency feat, we see that barbarian resiliency adds its 3 hit points for every barbarian feat that you take, right? And so barbarian resiliency has its own copy of that same exact rule element on it that's just adding to this. And so now if we look at Valeros's actor data, right, we come down to flags, PF2E, and Barbarian, archetype feet count 2. Right, so the system is now correctly counting. We have the correct number of feats, and we can reference that flag in a flat modifier, right? So we have, it's a modifier to our HP, it's 3 times whatever value is stored in that flag. And so by doing this, we can actually write to actor data in such a way that we can reference it later, right? So we can modify that base actor data. And that's not all you can actually do with these active effect likes. You can also modify things that are sort of system functions. So there's a few of these that are sort of strange, and you kind of just have to know they exist or dig around in source code to know they exist. But let's say the gang up feat, right? Gang up has an active effect like, and one of the bits of actor data is in its attributes. You can tell it that you can gang up, right? That's part of the flanking automation for the system, and that flanking structure has a lot of stuff in it. So we can go and take a look here. All right, token.actor, and we're just going to go right to attributes.flanking. And so we can see there's, several things in here. So we have, can flank, true, flankable, true, off-guardable, true. And we can look at some other things that actually modify that and, sort of deduce how it works. So let's look at the deny advantage class feature. In order to get deny advantage, or deny advantage means that you're not flat-footed to flanking creatures of your level or lower. And so we can take a look here. And so the system automatically knows that this off-guardable thing here, if it has a number written to it, that is saying a level that you have to be, because we've written it to account for deny advantage. So you could set this to false, and you can't be flanked at all. If we looked at, say, the all-around vision bestiary ability, right, you can turn off flanking entirely, right? With deny advantage, we have these other things, right, hidden, undetected, or flanking, all get this, and so we get this sort of off-guardable general thing. But they would both end up doing, if I did false here, that would be equivalent to saying this. For flanking purposes, they're the same. So there's a lot of little things in actor data that you can modify. You can set these, right, if we look at fetchling, fetchlings, one of the stranger things about the rules is they don't just have dark vision, their dark vision also does not specify that it's in black and white. And so we have a color dark vision flag that says, hey, yep, they have dark vision and they should see in color, so don't do the monochrome dark vision for them. And there's other things that are AP spoilers that use this, that give you color dark vision explicitly. So yeah, there's a lot of things you can modify with active effect likes. You can also write a lot of actor data with them, or fill in actor data with other things. So let's take a look at Automaton. They have one of the more complicated examples of active effect likes and how it's interacted with, and this is one of the things I will go in depth on in the next video. But you can even set so this active effect like is doing an override. We're setting the priority to 10 because it is very, sorry, I forgot to mute my phone before I started recording this. So we're setting the priority to 10, so this happens before any other active effect likes. And then we're, instead of setting a string or a number, right, like we had been with the other ones, we're going to set a whole object all at once. And so this object is made up of two different arrays, greater and lesser. And if you read through how automaton works, they get feats that can activate enhancements of other feats. And so we need a place to record what enhancements you have. And that's what these arrays are for, is that each of these feats, right, if I come in here to our feat browser and I search for automaton feats, right, if I come into Arcane Eye sets in this lesser array, right, in this first one, right, we're setting up these arrays, flags.pf2e.automaton.enhancements, and then the value has a lesser. The way we would reference that is by enhancements.lesser. So now this is referring specifically to the array itself. And then inside that array, we're going to add a new entry, and that entry is this whole thing. And this looks suspiciously like it's part of a rule element, and it will be. And like I said, I'll go into that in the next video, talking about, you know, sort of how flexible we can get with this. And hopefully this hints that you can do a lot of very cool things. So here we have a feat that is going to be adding an option to other feats. When you select those other feats, you will get more than one option added to. You're going to see the correct number of options, and it's extendable. So if Paizo or a third party published new feats for automaton, the third party or we could easily modify them without having to go and change the actual enhancement feats. Active effect likes let us really dig into a lot of really, really cool automation on actors. The other thing that you need to be aware of with active effect likes is that the phase will often matter depending on what you are trying to do. So we don't talk too much normally about the phases of actor data preparation, but they matter here because if you're trying to predicate an active effect like, right, so let's say I want to predicate this active effect like on being above level 10. You know, so this active effect like would only kick on if I'm above level 10. That's doable because your level is a base part of your actor data. But if I wanted to instead have this active effect like happen when my HP percent is above 10 or less than 10, right? So when I'm less than or equal to 10% of my remaining health, I want this active effect like to kick on. That's a problem because during actor data preparation, the very first thing that happens is active effect likes go off, and then other actor data is checked. And so this HP percent roll option just is not available to an AE-like rule element. They happen too early. And sometimes you can get around that. Other times you can't. And we can get around it by changing the phase that these happen in. So you could try, if you were trying to say, muck with some roll option rule elements or, use a predicate on this and it's just not working, you can try kicking the phase back from the apply active effect like phase, which is the first phase, to something like before derived. Right, and so I don't think this would still work for HP percent, but you can put it back to behind other things. You can also change the priority within a phase, right? That's what the priority here does. But phases themselves are completely separate. So an active effect like with a priority of 1,000,000 is still going to happen before an active effect like with a priority of 1, but its phase pushed back to before derived, because the before derived phase happens after apply active effects. right? And so then there's other phases too. There's after derived and there's before roll, and usually it's best to put things in the phase that they default to, or if that doesn't work, the earliest possible phase that will cause them to work, that will cause them to function. And a lot of that data, or a lot of that information, is covered in the wiki. So please see the wiki if you're having trouble with the phase, or come and talk to us on Discord, and we can absolutely help you out, figure out, what phase you need to actually be in. Do you even need that? Maybe it's something different. This is kind of the deep end of rule elements, so very good. Very good questions can come up a lot with this, because it's not as easily structured as other rule elements. There's probably never going to be a form for active effect like, for example. It can just be so chaotically structured. You can write whatever you want. The one thing you shouldn't do, however, is if you are writing arbitrary data to actor, like we're doing here, right, where we are writing this arbitrary new data structure to the actor, definitely do that in the flags. You can do that in flags, and there's a PF2E structure in flags already. You can use it. Make sure you don't write to something that already exists. So if you wrote to flags.pf2e.kineticist on your kineticist, then you would run the risk of running into some of the actor data flags that we use for kineticist, which there are a lot of. So you would want to double check that you are away from stuff the system is already doing, and the easiest way to do that is to just have your, module name, whatever your module you're making, or your world, whatever. This does need to be a defined thing, but if you have a module, this will already exist, whatever your module name is. Or you could just, use pf2e .homebrew.barbarian, right? And so this will now create a new structure in there, and that will definitely be away from anything the system ever does. So that's just one thing to be aware of, is active effect likes can screw up actor data if you really, muck with them. The last thing I want to show about how to use these is, so let's look at Bard dedication. Most of the dedication, multi-class dedication treats have something like this. And so you can see here they have a lot of active effect likes, and this active effect like is upgrading your performance rank, right? If you look in actor data, you can find system.skills, and then performance is PRF. It's not PER, so that there's no confusion between perception and performance. Intimidation is also ITM, so that there's no confusion between intimidation and intelligence as short references, right? And so we're going to upgrade system.skills.performance.rank to 1, which is the value for trained, and that's because you're trained in performance, right? You become trained in occultism and performance by taking the Bard dedication. And so you could see we have both of those rule elements here doing that upgrading for us. The next rule element that I want to talk about is the role option rule element. And we already talked about role options as the things that you can predicate on, and the role option rule element lets us add whatever we want to that list of role options present in a role. For the most part, that's not, particularly necessary, because a lot of the things you would want to predicate on are already in role options. So the most use you will get out of the role option rule element comes from what's called toggles. So you can actually add a checkbox to the actor's sheet that will toggle on or off a rule, right? And so here we have this double slice second attack, and we can see that it's modifying our attack modifiers, right? It's modifying all the modifiers on our strikes. The way that we can build these, right? So if we look at the nimble dodge feat, so here we've got the role option is nimble-dodge, right? It's the Kebab case version of the name of the feat. That's just a good, practice to have. And then we have toggleable true. And so this tells it to make a new checkbox on the actor. The domain tells it what, this is kind of like the selectors, but it's not. Different selectors or different statistics have different domains. If you are unsure at all about what you're going to use it for, just make the domain all. That is totally safe. We just sometimes try to restrict it down a little bit more for the system so that we have a little bit more control if we have role options that might accidentally end up with the same name, right? And so if we, look at Valeros and we add the nimble dodge feat to him, we get the toggle added here. If I check it, I get a +2 AC bonus. If I uncheck it, the bonus goes away. And that's because, if we look in our feats, nimble dodge has this flat modifier predicated on this nimble dodge roll option, which is only present on the actor when we have this thing toggled on. Okay, so there's some other things we can do with these role option rule elements, though. So let's say instead of Valeros, right, we don't have a iconic psychic to test out, but psychic very recently got a lot of love from the devs, from us devs, in order to actually make a lot of their stuff work. And so let's, quickly build one, and we can, see how some of these toggles work on them. So the first thing you'll notice is that these toggles on the psychic don't show up on the actions tab, right? We have this mind shift thing that does, but that's because mind shift is a bunch of actions as well as some other things. So right here on the spellcasting tab, we have these two different toggles. One of them has a checkbox and the other one has a drop down. And we can actually come over here and take a look at how some of these are constructed. This has our role option for the amps, right? And so, like I said before, this is just a localization string. If I change the label, that's just the text that goes on there. Right, so here we have an all domain because these can be used for a lot of stuff. The option is amp-spell. Then this is what causes them to get placed on the spellcasting tab instead of the actions tab. So we have this placement argument. And right now there's only actions, which is default, and spellcasting. And then we have toggleable true. That's what makes it an actual toggle. Instead of being just something that is on, right? If I took toggleable true off, then we don't have a option there anymore. But the amp spell roll option would be present on all rolls the actor makes. Right, so right, add that back in. And so that's how these work, right? Is you create these little checkboxes. When they're checked, some roll option is on. When they're unchecked, the roll option is off. Very simple. There's another way to interact with these, and that is as something that has sub-options. And so we're going to scroll down here. Oscillating wave, for those who have never read Psychic is a complicated class, and oscillating wave is about 70% of the complication. So if we come back to this, we can see how this relates, right? So we have our label. This just is a localization string for conservation of energy. This gives us the conservation of energy option, and then we have sub options. And so we can either add energy to a spell or we can remove energy, right? And so if I select add energy, we have a selection of fire. If I select remove energy, we have a selection of cold. With this particular thing, right, this is something that is always on, right? Oscillating wave psychics don't get to choose to turn off their conservation of energy. It's either they're either adding energy or removing energy, and then it resets after 10 minutes. It's whatever. But for the most part, like, we don't need to worry about them needing to turn it off, and so we can take the checkbox away with this always active, right? So this is saying it's always true. It's just one of these two values, right? If I remove this, then apply, we see we get the checkbox back, and we can now turn off that actual roll option. So, right, in here we have this suboptions array, and each of these suboptions, right, we've got 2 items in there. There's this one here, and that is to add energy. That has a label and a value. The value doesn't have to match your label. And then we have, you know, our second option, right? If I added a third option, you know, right, I now have 3 options inside my sub-option. So this is really useful. So if I do, say, a roll, and then inspect it, I not only have conservation of energy, it's on because it's always on, but I can search and I can see conservation of energy, fire. And so the system includes that we're going to be adding fire damage, or we're going to be overriding the damage of this with fire. And so if we look at this next damage dice rule element, and for right now this is damage dice, in the future this will actually end up being a damage alteration rule element, which is a brand new rule element not released at the time this video is being recorded. But we can see inside here what conservation of energy is actually doing, right? So damage dice lets us add damage dice to a spell or a strike. Right now, it also has the ability to override the damage type for something. Like I said, that'll just be changing. But what's happening here is similar to what we saw before, where you're referencing item data. The selection you have is stored in the flags on the item. And so this is saying that when we have add energy selected, that value is fire. And so this is saying override the spell's damage type with fire, and the selector is spell damage. And then the predicate is saying do that for any of these spells, right? Breathe fire, cone of cold, fireball, fiery body, fire shield, flame vortex, frostbite, heat metal, ignition, polar ray. And most of these already deal fire damage anyways, but you know, if you're removing energy, then all of these would then deal cold damage, which is what that class feature does. Is it changes the damage type of these spells from fire to cold, or from cold to fire. And then because we added this something else option that has electricity as its value, if I selected this and say, you know, so I'm going to add fireball, cast it, roll damage, we're now dealing electricity damage because I added that in as an option, and because that damage type is just read directly from the flag, it gets added here, right? So roll options with sub-options are incredibly useful, and there's one thing I want to preview. I don't know if it will be out by the time this video makes it out, but we'll see if we can beat the release of the video. But you can build roll option sub-options dynamically by merging things together. So let's take a look at that. So to see how we can merge options together, merge these different sub-options together on different items, we're going to open up the archetypes journal. And we're going to open that up because we're going to take a look at how we are implementing Spell Trickster. If you've never read through the Spell Trickster archetype, the fact that the preamble is this large and it's a very large archetype should tell you there's a lot of complex stuff going around here. But the big idea behind Spell Trickster is that you pick up spell tricks and you can use them to modify spells as you cast them. So let's take a look at a couple of these feats here. So we have the roll option rule element here, right? And this, if just looking at this, you would think, okay, so we have a roll option, and it's talking about, we're going to do some spell trickster stuff, and it's on the spellcasting tab, and then it's got a sub option, but it's one sub option. And what's the point of a drop-down box on an actor with only one option? Well, it's because every single one of these feats has that same drop-down box. And because they have the same option, they have this spell trickster as their option, and we have this new parameter that if you want to use it, you will need to be on system version 5.14, which is not out yet as of the time I'm recording this, but will be out very soon. This mergeable true, this is telling the system, hey, both of these belong in the same exact drop-down. So when you have both of these feats, it will include both Barrier Shield and Agile Hand as options. And the more feats you take from this archetype, the more options you have on your spellcasting tab. Right? If we come over here to our Psychic, and we just start dropping stuff in, right? Spell Trickster, we only have the one, the Forceful Push, but as we add more, we get more and more options added to that list. And so, right, what each of these actually does is, different for each one. So you would have to go through and read this very complicated archetype, but it's a way for us to build these options more dynamically so that each feat has to hold its own rules and you don't have to worry about building up some larger structure on some core feat and then letting everything else fill it in, or accounting for all the possible permutations. You can just build that list dynamically. It's very, very neat. So these role options and sub options are a great way of handling very complex setups for actors. Alright, we're coming toward the end of the video now, and I want to talk about one of the other really big rule elements that kind of just blows open a lot of what you're able to do in the system, and that is choice set. So when I add a feat that gives a choice to an actor, like, say, Assurance, right, I get this drop-down box full of all of the choices I can make. So we take the Assurance feat, we get that. I can also do, say, multi-talented, right? And it gives us a choice of all of the dedication feats, right? So Valeros is now a, battle dancer, swashbuckler, multi-class. And so let's take a look at, how each of those is built so we can, get an idea for what, what we can do with these choice sets, the things that actually give us those choices. So we already saw this a little bit before, but this is the Assurance choice set. And so the Assurance choice set, right, is just a list of all of the skills. Let's compare that to the skill training choice set, which is a list of all of the skills with predicates. Okay, so each of these two different rule elements are made up of a choices array. Right? I can collapse them down so we can see the difference here, right? So this one's on an actor, so it's already got a selection made. They both have this prompt that's the same exact prompt, it's just pick a skill. And then, this one's got a flag of skills, this one's a flag of assurance, doesn't really matter, what we call them. The choices array is the thing that's important here, right? So here we're just giving us each choice is an object, it has a label and a value, and that label and value give us, two different things or gives us any number of things we can pick from, right? So here we've just enumerated out every single skill in the game, including lore. And here we've done the same thing, but now we have this extra predicate in each of these choices. And the reason we would do that is because if you take the skill training feat, right, you're becoming trained in a skill. So we shouldn't show you skills that you aren't, or skills that you are already trained in. Right? So you can see, like, we have the choice of Arcana or Deception or Medicine, all these skills that we're untrained in, because we have filtered down not annoying at all that Paizo released a Kingdom feat with the same name, right? So we've filtered it down by saying that, hey, only show acrobatics if you are untrained in acrobatics, right? The same thing for Arcana, right? Only show each of these if you are untrained in them. And you can do this the same, predicating that we've been doing this whole time. You can build out, a very complex statement inside your choice set just to handle, whatever you want to let it show the choice or not. You can even have two choice sets on an item that actually reference each other, so that you don't pick the same thing twice, right? And the way that you do that, so let's import this here, and let's break some rules. Let's change this up. So let's say I have a choice set that I want to be between any skill that starts with A. Right, select A skill. Get it? All right, so we have acrobatics, arcana, or athletics, and I don't care about these particular things. This is, by the way, one of the nice things about this editor is you can control click to add multiple cursors, so we can edit all three of these at once. So we're going to use a new logical test that we haven't used yet, and that is the not logical test. Not is a single statement, right? So we want this to be not and skill chosen. We're just going to copy, paste, right? Those multiple cursors are just the greatest thing ever. So now, right, so we have this new, this role option, skill chosen, and then a subdomain of the actual skill. This doesn't exist, but we're going to make it exist. So we're going to say skill 1, and then we are going to add a new argument here, and that is role option. Note that this is, lowercase r in this one, and that's because this is camel case, where it starts with a lowercase letter, and the second word is capitalized. Right, second and all subsequent words are capitalized. And so this is now skill chosen. Okay, so now we have this role option. So what this is going to do is this is going to let us make a choice between these three skills. And once we choose one, it's going to set a role option of skill chosen and the value of that skill, the value of that choice we made. So now, right, so we're going to add a new rule element just for the sake of sanity, we'll put everything in order here, and then we're going to paste in our thing, and we're going to say skill 2. So these are now 2 different flags. So we're going to get a choice of one skill, then the next, and then we're going to say skill 1. All right, we're going to become really, really good at skill 1. And slightly less good at skill 2. Okay, so now here's our, super skill training feat. We're going to pick one skill that starts with A, become legendary, one skill that starts with A, and become master. So now let's check acrobatics. Because we chose acrobatics to become legendary in, we don't have it as an option to pick it from this because we told it, if that's a chosen skill, don't show it in the box. And so now we finish our choices, and the active effect lights kick on, and we get these 2 now as set to where we just told it to. So choice sets let us do a lot of really, really cool stuff. That is one way of setting up a choice set. Let's look at the other feat that we added to Valoros back at the beginning here, and that was multi-talented. All right. So that showed a list of all of the dedication feats in the system. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to go write that list by hand. So instead, what we do is we have a new type of choice structure. So instead of being an array of choices, we have this object that itself is a filter object. And this filter has an array, and that is basically a predicate for the filter, right? So we're saying, hey, we're going to have a bunch of choices. Those choices are going to be made from feats, right? It's item type feat. And then we have this filter to apply on the feats. So the feat must be level 2, it must be a class feat, it must have the dedication trait, and it must have the multi-class trait. And so because we have set up this filter now, the system just automatically searches through all of the compendiums and all of the world items. So it would automatically include if you had a, if you, for example, bought a third-party product, like, the upcoming Battle Zoo Eldamon book, when you drag and drop the multi-talented feat on there, it would automatically include Eldamon Trainer in the list because it finds it in the compendium, and it meets all these qualifying things for the filter. It meets every single one of those conditions, and so that dedication feat would show up. So really nice for homebrew, really nice for automating things. We do this a lot in the system with class features. So let's take a look at the Muses class feature. So here, right, if we pull up a couple of Muses off to the side for a reason, if we look in here, we have choices. The filter is item tag Bard Muse, right? So this is a tag, not a trait, right? And we set those on items here on the Details tab. Right? We just have this other tag section, and we just manually, when we're making a Bard Muse, we can make a new one, Maestro. And because it has this Bard Muse tag added to it, if I add the Muses class feature to an actor, we get that new thing there because the system sees this qualifying item and it lets us pick that item. All right, so that's how that's how these choice sets work for both manually defined choices as well as filters. There's another way of doing it which is related to that automaton thing. I will get into that in the next video. It's actually a fair bit more complicated, but for time I'm just going to skip over it for now. So the last thing that I want to talk about with choice set is a rule element that it very often goes along with, and that is grant item. So let's say I have a choice set that grants another item, right? And so we can see that here in Muses, right? So we have this this filter that tells it, hey, find all items that meet this filter, and then what you actually do with it is grant that item. And granting an item is done with the grant item rule element. It has this UI to it. There is more you can do that's not featured on the UI, but I will cover that in the next video because it's a lot more advanced. But grant item lets us grant the thing that we just chose, right? So here we're again looking at the item flags, and we are looking at this Muses rule selection flag. And that's just the item we chose up here. And so grant item will give that Bardic Muse to the actor. And we saw that on Valeros. That is how you get these nested features, is you grant item. And so like if we look at shield block, the shield block feature, instead of having a resolvable call to the item data, this is just the actual, UUID of the feat. And you can do that, just open up a feat. Up here is this little book. If you left click on it, it'll copy just the ID. If you right click on it, it'll copy the full path. And that's what you want, right? So you just open up a feat, right click on that little book, paste it in here, bam, you now have an item that grants another item. The one caveat that I will give on grant item is that you cannot use it with physical equipment. So you can't have, say, a sword that grants an action. It's just not possible. It's a pretty hard limitation of grant item. And in the next video, I will get into a lot more specifics about grant item and some of the neater things you can do, like in-memory grants of conditions, adjusting the item that you're granting on the fly, making choices. You could grant, if you had a feat that said, oh, you also get the assurance feat with athletics, you could do that. You could have it just automatically make that choice for you, so the choice for what skill to get athletics in or to get assurance in doesn't pop up at all. So I'm going to end this video with another pair of rule elements, one of which has a very nice form on it, and another that is really useful, especially like if you have, say, a sprite that has a corgi mount, things that we get asked about fairly often. So the first one is the aura rule element, right? So aura. And so I'm just going to make an effect here, and here in rule elements, I'm going to select aura, I'm going to click this, and I'm going to get a really, really nice form. So, right, I want this aura to be a 20-foot aura. The traits, it's going to be a, say it's a polymorph effect, right? And these don't really matter all that much. But now in here for effects, what I can do is I can drop in a new effect. And so what I want to do is I want this aura to give me an effect that makes me large. Right, so this is going to be our effect that we'll use for corgi. So I'll actually make this small, right? So this is the creature size rule element. Just click this, right? And so we're going to say value small. All right, and so now I've got my aura. It's 20 feet. I'm going to drop in this, and I'm going to say it affects all. I can have it affect allies or enemies, and then remove on exit. And so now if I drop this on Valeros, he shrinks to small. The dragon grows to small. So remember we set the dragon to tiny before, right? And if Valorous moves out, the dragon shrinks back down. So the thing to know about the aura rule element is that currently it only supports adding rules or adding effects to an actor when that actor enters the aura. It doesn't have any ability to do, if they end their turn in the aura, or if, they have to make a save first. So you can just leave the effects blank on the aura. If I delete the effect out of this tab, then it's just a reminder, right? You can also change the appearance of these, right? So you'll notice that right now it's just a black border. I can crank up or down the opacity of that ring. So if I don't want it to show up, I want it to be purely something that just happens. Little goblin here. And he's a real big goblin, but only when no one's looking. So there's a lot you can do here. It doesn't matter what these effects do. They're just going to affect, just like anything else. You could have this rule element add a weakness. You could have this rule element add damage, subtract damage. Doesn't matter. The one thing you can't put directly in here is conditions. So you can't have an aura that grants, say, enfeebled 1. You would have to have an effect that itself grants enfeebled. There's reasons for that. The other thing to note about this is you can use this texture. So if you have like a nice animated texture, you could, set it in here so that it looks like, smoke or something around your actor. You won't see the fill of this until there is an active combat. And you mouse over, and that tells you the squares that are actually affected. Right? And that's just to avoid this situation where you're moving around a bunch and just keep flashing. It's kind of a pain. Another thing that trips a lot of people up is that auras are only active on the active scene, and only if you are on a 5-foot square grid, right, or square grid. So this won't work on hex grids, it won't work on gridless, and that's because we just don't actually have rules for what these aura shapes should look like on those grids, and we don't really like guessing at what the rules should say. How much of an actor has to be in an area before the aura kicks on. With square grid, it's very well defined. With others, not so much. So that is, the last 2 rule elements that, kind of want to go over. I want to show one more thing with creature size, because this is a really small example, but this right here is how you would make a corgi mount. So the last example I want to show is the Enlarge spell, right? Let's actually give Valorous some innate spell casting, and let's have him actually cast a spell. Okay, so Valorous, he's got this really high rank casting of Enlarge. We cast it, we drag it to him. We're going to get the choice of huge or large. Right, we choose huge, and he grows. He also gets the clumsy condition and a bunch of other stuff. So let's take a look at sort of how this was constructed, because it's a good example of a lot of the things that we just talked about. The first is this choice set, right? So we have this choice set that you can have if you are if the parent level, if the spell that granted this effect is above level 4, you can choose huge. If the spell is below level 4 or above level 6, you can choose large, right? And that's a, parse this. The base 2nd level spell makes you large. At 4th level, it makes you huge. And then at 6th level, you can choose either of those effects, and it affects multiple creatures, right? Here in the choice set, right, we have a lot more stuff going on now, right? Not only do we have this predicate that's a little bit more complicated than just saying, oh, is the skill untrained? Now we also have this, value as an object itself, right? So we have value, damage, reach, and size. So we're setting up this object instead of just having a string here or having a number here. And then, here's a much more complicated predicate, but it's there to just say, hey, at level 4 and 5, if you're casting this, you don't actually get large as a choice. Kind of weird for the spell, but whatever, right? And here's how it's a bonus of 2 damage, it's a large size, and then you have a reach of 10. And so then in the creature size rule element, we have some new things in here, right? So we have this reach override, and so this takes the flag, so it's not just the enlarge flag on the choice set, right? So if we come down here to flag enlarge, it's enlarge.reach. It's specifically the reach part of the value, right? And so here, right, we have enlarge.size. This is telling us to read either large or huge from the choice that we made. This is telling us we're going to read either 10 foot or 15 foot from the choice we made. And then this is resize equipment. So your equipment grows with you when you cast enlarge. And that's important because if you are, say, a giant instinct barbarian and you have the enlarge spell cast on you, if your equipment didn't grow with you, then you're medium size, you grow large, and all of a sudden your large size greatsword is no longer oversized and you lose your big damage bonus from having an oversized weapon. So this is an important bit for actually automating those effects. And then in here we have the flat modifier that says, hey, for melee damage, we should actually just make this melee strike damage, we are going to read the damage bonus either +2 or +4, depending on the level of the spell or rank of the spell. I'm never going to get used to that. And then we also have this grant item where we are granting Clumsy 1, because the spell makes you Clumsy 1 when you were affected by it. And so you have this, this sort of combination of a lot of the things that we just did, of, we're making a choice. That choice is actually quite complicated. We are changing the creature size, we're granting something, and then we're doing modifier. And, these two are reading lots of different actor data. The flat modifier and the creature size are reading the item data, from this choice set that we had. And so I think that's a really good example to kind of close out all of these, rule element examples that we've talked about, is, because it's a good, mix of a lot of things. And there's a lot of stuff in the system like that where you have a lot of different examples to pick from. So if you are stuck on something, we don't have an example in the wiki, just look around in the system and, ask, is there anything at all in Pathfinder 2 that acts like this already, or at least acts anything close to like what I'm trying to do? We tend to try to keep the system up to date with, new automation as it becomes available. Doesn't always happen. Sometimes we'll get a new feature available to data entry, and data entry is just busy. So it might be a month or two before we can really take advantage of it. When we got item alterations, we took advantage of that pretty quick. We were pretty lucky to have a bunch of volunteers had time to, implement a lot of really cool things to get, Spell Trickster and Psychic and all that automated properly once we had them. Witch and Oracle, everybody got bonuses out of that, basically half the classes at least. So yeah, look at stuff in the system for examples. If you can't find anything, come to the Discord, ask questions. Look at the wiki. For the most part, you can find examples in the system that are already done, and you can sort of pick them apart. The important bit is that you should stop and understand what each of those pieces are actually doing. And that's because, if you just take something and start pulling it apart, if that's something that had, say, brackets in it, that can be hard to, figure out, what are you looking at, unless you actually go and, use an editor like Sublime Text or something else that, that lets you do a little bit more a little bit more structured editing of a large rule element or a large amount of JSON data. So that's going to be it for this video. Thank you for watching. I realize this ballooned out to 2 hours long. Feel free to join us in Discord, in the PF2E Discord, and we can help you out if you have any trouble. Check out the wiki. I do try to keep that thing up to date, and also look out for the next video, which will hopefully be coming out in a couple months. That will be going over some of the more complicated examples of rule elements. And then later this year, I'll have 2 videos on data entry, both for the system and for your module. And that will be, sort of best practices, how to do data entry quickly, and how to, follow our style guide, everything like that. So thanks, and I'll see y'all around.